Astronomy in Reverse by Pansley. Chapter 9. The Truth. Even though Bucky's the one who made the decision, it still surprises him just how easily he and Peter fall into their new normal. After the incident of the fever, the rest of summer floats by fairly smoothly. Peter and Bucky adapt to their mismatched schedules, Peter usually working with Delmar in the evenings while Bucky is home. So the kid takes to coming during the day and visiting him at work, which neither Bucky nor his bosses mind. In fact, Frank, though he tried to be nonchalant about it, had raised Bucky's weekly wage after seeing their apartment, although he never admitted that that was the reason why. Bucky didn't complain when the man had handed him an extra $100 the first week after Peter had been sick. After all, the more money they save, the better shape they'll be in when the other shoe drops. But nothing major had really come of the bus incident, not yet anyway. The local news had covered it, newspapers and televisions and online blogs according to Ned. But most of the articles focused on the actual heroics, not the awkward hug afterward, though Peter assured him the videos were still permanently floating around online, which means the potential threat is permanent too. They'd spent quite a bit of time, once Peter was well again, making sure their escape plan was airtight. 2 bug-out bags now lay hidden beneath the floor in their kitchen instead of 1, and the maps are drawn and marked and plotted, every necessity packed, but lightly enough that they aren't weighed down, their rendezvous locations picked, their plan rehearsed and drilled into both their heads, along with backup plans B through D. That had been one side of their new normal, preparing for the fallout of the bus incident. The other side had been adapting to Bucky's boss's newfound interest in his personal life. It had been Bucky's decision, but Peter had been more than eager to go along with it. It wasn't entirely new anyway, just more real now that they had spoken of it out loud. Peter's face had gone slightly red, but he nodded obediently, understanding the necessity of becoming habituated to referring to Bucky as his dad. Bucky, likewise, had become used to referring to Peter as his son, even in private. The more accustomed to the idea they become, the less likely they'll be to slip up in front of the Descartes, or Delmar, or Ned, or whoever they meet when the time comes to move on. It had been an awkward thing to ask of Peter, but the boy understood his reasoning and didn't hesitate to stop calling him Bucky altogether. Which is exactly what surprises him, even now, as the heat of summer bleeds into cooler weather, rain falling most days, the sky filling up with clouds and replacing the blazing sun he'd grown used to. It still surprises him every time Peter says it, how easily the name falls from his lips, how his expression doesn't change at all when he looks up at Bucky as he comes through the door and says, "Welcome home, Dad." Bucky smiles, just as surprised with himself, how he doesn't even pause before he's ruffling the boy's hair and answering, "Hey, kiddo, how's your night off going?" "Kind of warm," he says, leaning back on the wobbly stool, steadying himself, his hands gripping the countertop. "I've been scrapbooking all day like a lonely grandma." "Well, scrapbooking is what you're supposed to do on rainy days," Bucky says as he glances at the page of photos Peter's assembled, most of them old from his life long before they met, but some of them are newer, 2 in particular that stand out, the ones Sharon had recently taken. The first is of Peter sitting behind the wheel of a junky old Dodge, Frank leaning on the window and pointing at the dashboard, instructing him, smiling a little as Peter recklessly stares where the man is directing, his attention stuck. The other is of Bucky and Peter, Bucky's cap pulled a little lower than usual when Sharon pulled the camera out, his hands in the engine of a car, while Peter leans against the bumper, gazing up at Bucky with that familiar, deeply affectionate look in his big dark eyes. Bucky loves that photo, loves that Peter wants to preserve it, but its existence makes him almost dizzy with anxiety. "Pete," he says reluctantly, tone gentle, as he puts a hand on the boy's shoulder, "you shouldn't keep that one." Peter glances at the photo quickly, then back up to Bucky, his face pleading. "But you can hardly see your face in it, your hat's in the way. Please, it's the only one I have of you and me. I love this photo." Bucky sighs, his hand squeezing Peter's shoulder comfortingly. "I do too, but someone who's looking for me could recognize me easily, and then they know your face too. This too risky." "But," Peter protests, picking the picture up and holding it against his chest protectively like he's scared Bucky will take it from him. "What if I keep it in my wallet? Someone's always on me." Bucky sighs, knowing it's a bad idea, knowing he should tell Peter no. But he's as powerless in front of those puppy dog eyes as he's always been.
You don't let anyone else see it, you understand?
He says, keeping his voice stern.
Even if you have to destroy it to make sure.
Peter's face twists, but he nods acceptantly and says, I promise.
Good.
He gives him a fond pat on the shoulder, then nods his head towards the love seat.
Why don't you move this to the couch so I can start dinner?
Peter's face lights up. I'm going to help, he says as he stands, clearing off the counter hurriedly so they can continue their nightly tradition of making dinner together, the scrapbooking forgotten. Identity is a strange thing. Bucky has suffered from not having one, or rather from having one he didn't choose and would never want, for long enough to know that life can be a tough thing to navigate without an identity you're proud of, one you want to protect. He's lived life in limbo, moment to moment, without any goal or desire except survive, and that's all you're capable of without an identity, without any sense of self. He hadn't lived free from Hydra long enough to finish building a new one when Peter came along. He hadn't made it past the stage of pure instinctual survival before he suddenly had a child in his home, needing his attention, needing to be fed, protected, loved. He hadn't yet finished rebuilding Bucky before he was suddenly someone else. Someone completely new and foreign. Damn it! And that's the strange thing about identities, how they constantly grow and change, how they're molded by the experiences we live through. Bucky had been so obsessively determined to become his own person, whoever that may be, to be a human being and not a weapon, to find who he is, discover himself. It was a need he didn't have time to focus on over the last year, too preoccupied with the necessities, with finding food, shelter, money. But it kept him up at night on bad days when he couldn't get out of his own head, when he was trapped in the void that was his identityless existence, desperately screaming, "Who am I?" Only to have the name Bucky echoed back at him until the word was hollow. And then Peter came along. And suddenly the name Bucky wasn't hollow anymore. It was him. When Peter would call out to him, Bucky would be filled by the dumbstruck realization of, that's me. He means me. I'm Bucky. Until being called by his own name was normal again, familiar. It made him feel safe, Peter calling his name. It was the security of having his identity back. But identities change, and it's strange to Bucky how easy it was to forgo Bucky entirely. This thing he had desperately wanted for so long, and trade it for Dad without batting an eye, without so much as a shred of doubt. He'd been so obsessed with leaving Asset behind. Now all he can think about is how right Dad feels. Especially in moments like these, when Peter is dead tired from the extra training Bucky has put him through, pounding and sagging against the park bench with a long groaning Dad! That makes Bucky want to laugh from the sheer ridiculousness of how pitiful he sounds. My legs are killing me!
Come on, kid, it wasn't even that long of a run. How are you so sore already?
Don't know. Peter says, wincing as he tries to stretch his legs out. They hurt all the time lately. It's really annoying. A thought strikes Bucky, and he gives Peter a surprised look.
Maybe it's growing pains.
Peter blinks at him owlishly. You think? He asks, forcing himself to stand up despite his obvious discomfort. Am I taller? I don't feel any taller.
Let's see.
Bucky says, taking Peter's shoulders in his hands and facing him, his only reliable source of measuring the boy's height by comparing it to his own. He straightens his metal hand out and lays it flat on top of Peter's head, surprised when his hand reaches just below his heart.
Well, I'll be damned.
Am I bigger?
You're practically a giant.
Bucky says, grinning, ruffling Peter's hair.
Do you remember how little you were when we met? You were only this big.
He lowers his hand down to just above his belly button. Peter's eyes widen in disbelief. Really?
Yeah, kid, really. God, I can't believe it. How did I not notice you sprouting up like a weed?
Peter grins, mischievous and a little proud. I'm going to be taller than you someday.
At this rate, probably.
Bucky says, then frowns down at him.
Kidding aside, don't. If you grow taller than me, I will lose my shit.
Peter laughs, his sweat-damp curls bouncing from the force of it. I'll need a haircut soon. Okay, in that case, maybe I'll stay just a little shorter. Just for you.
My hero.
Bucky smiles, and Peter leans into his side as they begin walking home, his narrow shoulder a familiar and necessary comfort beneath Bucky's arm. The strangest thing about identities is how they come to you. Sometimes welcomed, often not. Bucky had no say in being the Winter Soldier, had no choice in being given that identity, but the same is true now of being given the identity of Peter's dad. He didn't choose that either, and yet it's him, in a way that the Fist of Hydra never was. A whole and consuming rightness that fills and completes him to his very core. The Winter Soldier identity was nothing but a mask Hydra forced him to wear. This, now, being Peter's dad, this is the identity he found, the one he discovered, the one Peter discovered when he found him, though Bucky had been the one looking. The cold, bracing breeze of a cloudy autumn night rolls over Bucky and Peter like mist over a moor. The city is quiet for Queens anyway, and the rooftop is especially frigid as Peter dons his mask and ridiculous goggles, preparing for his nightly patrol. Bucky observes him, watching as Peter adjusts his uniform, the amateur stitching they added when Peter's arms and legs began to outgrow the sleeves, standing out garishly. Bucky had checked out an old falling-apart book from the library on how to patch clothing, and they'd done it together, repurposing an old shirt Peter had outgrown completely into patches to extend the sleeves and legs of his Spider-Man suit. It looks silly, but Peter's identity is preserved, and that's the important thing. He takes in his odd posture as Peter secures his web shooters. The boy's been quiet, relatively that is, and he seems particularly high-strung this evening, his shoulders tight and muscles twitching as he prepares to swing off the rooftop. Bucky's expression tightens as he thinks back to the fever of a couple months ago. Worried Peter is starting to feel unwell again, the thought of having to relive that awful day turning his stomach.
Hey,
Bucky calls gently, grabbing Peter's attention before he can lift his arm to swing away.
You feeling all right, kiddo?
Huh? Says Peter, caught off guard as though he didn't understand the question. Yeah, I'm okay. Just feel kind of anxious is all.
I could tell,
Bucky says.
What's up? Is this regular anxiety or spider anxiety? Something happened in school.
No, nothing like that. Peter sighs, looking back and forth between Bucky and the cityscape of Queens. I don't really know. I'm hoping checking things out will make me feel better. It's not even that bad, honestly. Just haven't felt like this in a really long time.
You want to go home, we'll go home,
Bucky says, reaching over and patting him reassuringly on the shoulder.
And if you need to patrol a little longer tonight until you feel better, that's fine too. It is Friday night after all.
Okay, Peter says, and Bucky can hear the smile in his voice beneath the mask. I don't think I want to be out long, though. Can we get McDonald's on the way home?
I don't think it's a good idea to pump all that crap into you if you're already feeling anxious,
he says, putting on his best tough dad face.
But it has been a while since we went out, so if you're feeling better after your patrol, then yeah, we can.
Woohoo! Peter cheers, straightening up on the ledge and stretching his arms one final time before he says, in that case, I'll be back before you know it.
Be safe,
Bucky calls after him, watching Peter leap from the building with a falsely cheerful, I will, that doesn't convincingly hide the underlying anxiety Bucky can still hear in the kid's voice. He watches until Peter swings out of sight. Queens seems peaceful enough tonight. Only the occasional siren, short-lived and far away. Traffic is slowly thinning, and Bucky leans over the rooftop ledge and observes the world around him, his own anxiety bubbling low in his stomach, stemming off of Peter's. He trusts his kid. He trusts his instincts, trusts that he'll be safe if he gets in over his head. He also trusts his abilities, and not just because he spent the last several months training him every single day. Peter is formidable and resourceful, and he told Bucky he would be safe, and Bucky trusts that he will be. But still, Peter seems naturally pulled in the direction of danger, by instinct or by fate, it doesn't matter. Something always brings him to the lurking alleyway predators and runaway buses of the world, and it grates on Bucky constantly, knowing he can't be there every minute of every day to protect his kid, knowing that some of the danger Peter will inevitably face will be his fault, following Bucky just as closely as it follows Peter, the threats that cling to both of them like shadows. Peter will run headfirst into danger, and Bucky can't stop him, just like he can't stop Peter from one day having to face the danger that will eternally be at Bucky's heels.
It's the life they've chosen, and nights like these are just a small part of the price they have to pay for becoming a family. The occasional anxious night when the danger seems to be looming overhead in exchange for the life he's built with the child who has become his son. The life they'd built together. He thinks back to the plans they've made, the maps they've drawn in case they're separated, all their rendezvous points and contingency plans. It doesn't feel like enough, even though Bucky knows he's prepared Peter as much as he possibly could. He lets himself drift to the thoughts he usually tries to stay away from, the unproductive kind, the sweet kind that feels so good when he has them, and so painful when he lets them go. Thoughts of a different life. He can picture it, though it's impossible. He can picture what it would have been like if there had been no Hydra, no radioactive spider. Him and Peter living in a bigger, clean apartment with plumbing that he doesn't have to fix every single day and a fridge that's quieter than the metro line. Windows that they won't have to tape up because they wouldn't need to hide. Teaching Peter to drive. Actually being able to drive the kid to school himself. Camping trips. Not looking over his shoulder constantly every time he leaves the house. He imagines living outside the city limits in a huge old farmhouse like the one he dreams about sometimes, timelessly beautiful on more land than they'd know what to do with. They could grow their own food. Peter could have a dog. On how happy the kid would be if he could live that life. How happy Bucky would be if he could give it to him. He pictures teaching Peter how to fix up old cars, owning his own mechanic shop like the one he runs for Frank. He pictures teaching the kid better things than how to break out of a chokehold. Peter having no need of that knowledge at all. Bucky having no need of it. They can have pieces of that life, he knows. Pieces of a peaceful life. That's all they get. And he's grateful for it, even if sometimes all he wants to do is close his eyes and imagine being able to be the father that Peter actually deserves. Giving him all the things he wants Peter to have every single time he looks at him. It's as he's wondering exactly when the other shoe will drop that it does. He feels the presence before he hears it, hears the footsteps before he turns and looks. Peter is the one who felt it coming, but the danger arrives for Bucky first.
I can't believe it's actually you.
The man says. Bucky knows his voice, but not his face, at least not the way it is now, half of it completely covered in grotesque burns.
We thought you'd be halfway across the world by now.
We... Bucky's mind echoes his blood running cold until it matches the frigid temperature of his middle arm. Hydra! He knew it! Knew this man was no civilian, even if he's dressed like one, holding out his arms as he walks across the rooftop after pulling a cell phone from his pocket. Bucky is so tense he can feel his muscles straining.
I couldn't believe it when I saw the video,
the man says, gesturing to his raised phone, even though the screen is blank.
Only saw your face in profile and thought, nah, there's no way he'd be stupid enough to stay here after Triskelion shit went down. But I had to be sure.
Bucky doesn't move as the man approaches. He assesses him, looking for any signs of a concealed weapon, or worse yet, an ambush. It seems outrageous that a Hydra agent would confront him alone, unarmed, but the smug grin on the man's face outweighs Bucky's expectations, so he waits, caught between making a break for a hit and subduing the man before he can call for backup.
I can't tell you how many times I watched that video while thinking to myself, there is no way in hell I'm watching the asset hug some vigilante punk kid. But color me surprised, soldier. Here I am waiting on rooftops in the freezing cold for Spider-Man to show up for weeks. And when I finally spot him, there you are. I can't believe my luck or your stupidity. Did you really think we wouldn't look for you?
Jesus, this guy never shuts up!
No,
he says.
And I don't think you came alone either.
Yeah, well,
the man says with a shrug, still grinning.
Call me overconfident, but this is an opportunity I just couldn't pass up. You see, I more or less got demoted after DC. Bosses weren't exactly thrilled that I couldn't protect Pierce.
The smugness drops from his face, and his eyes go almost unnervingly cold.
But I don't have to tell you that Hydra doesn't tolerate failure.
Bucky barely manages to suppress the shiver that tries to run up his back.
So they left me out here, told me my new mission was to scour every inch of the East Coast until I found you. And if I didn't find you, well, I'd better get used to the smell of garbage, because this is where I'd be staying, and I could kiss my position of handler goodbye.
Beneath the scars and burns, the man's eyes light up, an expression of manic glee taking over his face.
And now, here you are. And after I bring you in, I'll finally be able to get out of this glorified trash heap.
Bucky's eyes narrow, defensive, and incredulous all at once. You really think you could take me down by yourself?
The man's smile widens. Bucky feels a sharp, biting panic spear him down the middle.
I'm not really by myself, though, am I? He said cryptically. It's 2 against 1.
Bucky doesn't have time to search for his second opponent before understanding crashes over him. He turns to vault over the ledge, but the man is fast. Enhanced fast! He grabs Bucky by the back of his jacket, and he's forced to turn and block an incoming blow to the back of his head. His attacker opens his grinning mouth and says in horribly fluent Russian,
"Logging."
An uncontrollable tremor racks Bucky's body, and he grits his teeth so hard that his jaw aches as he rears back and punches the man hard across the face with his metal fist. The man staggers, blood spilling from his grinning mouth, and he lunges to deliver his own blow that Bucky narrowly dodges as he half shouts, "Rusted!" The man swings again, and Bucky can't maneuver out of the way in time as his knees buckle, a wash of painfully cold dread consuming him. He cries out in pain, but not from the blow. His head throbs agonizingly as a blinding whiteness begins seeping from the edges, whiting out his ability to think. "Furnace!" Bucky shouts, gathering all his strength, his rage, his desperation. He forces himself off the ground and charges at the man. If he can just shut him up, he can get away. He has to get away. He has to get home. Has to get home to Peter! He drives his fist as hard as he can into the other man's stomach, and the guy sputters on his next word as he's sent flying backwards. Bucky wastes no time and bolts for the ledge as fast as he can, but his legs give out and he hits the ground hard as the man spits and viciously screams, "Daybreak!" "No!" Bucky desperately thinks, begging himself, "No, don't let him! Get up! You have to get up!" He lets out a piercing, enraged scream as the man stands over him and says,
17,
which earns him a forceful stomp to the back of his head, muffling his screams as his face is smashed into the concrete. "No!" Bucky shouts, anger and fear filling him, everything else gone, his mind blank, just white! "Stop it!" He can hear the man grinning through the smugness in his voice.
"Benign!"
"Please!" he cries into the blinding white void, feeling his body surrender in spite of himself. Not again! 9. The man says, and Bucky screams his desperation as loud as he can, barely able at the last second to stop himself from screaming Peter's name.
"Homecoming!"
"Peter," he thinks desperately, everything else fading out. Peter, son."
1.
He feels the inky black tendrils pull him under. The man opens his mouth to speak, the final word hanging from his victorious mouth. He braces himself, but all he hears is a surprised shout of pain. And then hands on his back, small, gentle hands, trembling, frantic. "Bucky!" A voice, a desperate, watery voice. He knows that voice. "Bucky, please! Bucky, get up! Oh my God!" He tries to lift himself off the ground, every muscle in his body protesting. His mind is white. He can't think at all of it covered up like snow. "Bucky, come on, we gotta go!"
"You must be Spider-Man,"
says another voice, cold and grating. He can feel the scream leave his throat, but it's not his voice he hears. It's another one, softer, younger, just as desperate. "Stop it!" screams the familiar voice. The hands leave his back. The body moves away. "Leave him alone!" Pushing as hard as he can against the ground, he manages to lift himself onto his hands and knees. He can hear the struggle behind him, a chorus of strikes and blows and the sounds of bodies hitting pavement. He turns over, trying to see through the haze the impenetrable whiteness of his mind. A child and a man. The child is fast, but so is the man, and every punch and kick the kid dishes out, the man returns twice as hard.
"Sorry, kid,"
he says, delivering a kick to the boy that sends him flying into the unforgiving concrete ledge.
"But you have something that belongs to me."
The kid gasps and hisses in pain beneath his red mask. "He doesn't!" he says, getting to his feet. "You're not taking him!" The man smirks an unsightly look that makes his stomach turn.
You think so?
He turns and looks at him, opens his mouth to speak. Fear billows inside of him, and he desperately covers his ears, trying to block it out. No! The child shouts again, lifting his hand and shooting a white thread from his wrist that sticks to the man, which he then tugs on, sending him flying into the rooftop's door. The man crumbles with a cry of pain, and the kid uses the moment to run back over to him, frantically urging, "Come on, Bucky! Come on!" The child reaches out to him, tries to sling his arm over his narrow shoulders. His body feels too heavy to lift himself off the ground. The child wraps his other arm around his back and pulls him up effortlessly. "We gotta go! Come on!" The kid's head snaps up suddenly, and he pushes him out of the way and back down to the ground as the man charges at them, barreling into the child and knocking him down to the concrete too. The man punches the child hard across the face, then wraps his hands around his throat before he can recover and says,
"Just for that, I'm going to have him kill you so slowly."
The child struggles, trying to rip the man's hands off of his neck. He sputters and coughs, his fingers trembling as he tugs uselessly on the man's wrists. "No!" he coughs. Don't!
Oh, are you having a hard time breathing?"
The man taunts and removes one of his hands to grab the hem of the kid's mask instead.
"Here, let me help you."
And he pulls it up and off the boy's face, goggles and all, and tosses it away. The man studies the kid's face, then hums and says,
"This your tap, soldier?"
He looks at him.
"Maybe I'll let you have some fun with him one last time before you slit his throat."
He shudders. A flare of something, rage, rises up in him and bursts. He lifts himself up, forces himself, though his whole body feels as heavy and inflexible as stone. The child tries to take advantage of the man looking away from him and aims to punch him square across the jaw, but the man is quicker, and he catches the boy's wrist before it can make contact and slams it down on the ground.
"You just don't want to make this easy for yourself, do you?"
"I won't!" The kid coughs. He glares defiantly at the man above him. "Won't let you hurt him!" The man smiles. He feels that same burst of rage soar up inside of him again, and he forces himself to stand on shaking legs.
"Gonna be hard to stop me," the man says, grinning widely. "After I do this!"
The man wrenches on the boy's wrist in his hand and breaks it with a deafening snap. The child screams loud, long, and blood-curdling, and it cuts through the thick white haze, clouding his mind as sharply as if he had felt the pain himself. He's moving before he realizes it, tackling the man to the ground and then pummeling him for all he's worth, landing brutal blow after brutal blow. The man tries to speak, tries to get the godforsaken words out, but he doesn't relent and smashes his metal fist into his face again and again, venting every shred of rage and helplessness within him, hits him until the man's body goes lax. He knows he'll kill him if he doesn't stop, but he doesn't stop, too consumed by the blinding whiteness in his head, now filled with the unbearable sound of that child screaming, louder than anything he's ever heard, overriding everything else. He raises his hand again, intending on hitting the man's face until it breaks apart into pieces, but two arms wrap around it before he can deliver the blow and pull him back off the man's unconscious body entirely. The child kneels next to him, face wet with tears, as he clings to his metal arm and begs, "Don't! Please don't kill him!" They're both gasping for breath, and he curls in on himself and stares down at the ground, trying to block the screaming out, but it's all he can hear until he isn't even sure if it's the child beside him or if the sound is entirely in his head. He grits his teeth and squeezes his eyes shut, and then a small hand is gently cupping the side of his head, and a quiet voice says, Hey, Bucky, look at me! Look at me!" The hand against his head trembles, and he feels the body next to him moving close, kneeling between his own knees, dug into the concrete, a soft voice gently pleading, "Please, Bucky, look at me!" He feels the forehead press against his own, hears another heartbroken plea, "Look at me!" The hand falls to his shoulder. He feels drops of water fall and land on his metal hand. "Look at me, Dad!" Bucky looks up, his head lifting, until he can clearly see Peter's face, bruised, battered, utterly soaked in tears. Peter looks up at him and sobs brokenly when their eyes finally meet, letting himself collapse into Bucky's chest, cradling his broken wrist between their bodies. "Oh, God, Peter. Bucky gasps, shooting up and taking the boy by the shoulder so he could put enough distance between them to look at him. Peter, hey, let me see.
But Peter shakes his head, refusing to lift it, crying openly as Bucky fusses around him and tries to take stock of every injury he can see, his eyes drifting back to the boy's swollen wrist again and again.
Peter, I'm so sorry. I know it hurts, but you gotta let me see.
The kid shakes his head again, his sobs worsening until his entire body is racked with them. Bucky's never seen him cry like this before, never seen him so consumed by the tears that he'd completely refused to speak. He takes the boy into his arms and tries to soothe him, tries to calm him down enough that he can inspect his injuries, but Peter pulls back, sobs scarcely dying down. He tries, coughing from the bruises around his throat, and the sobs still trying to bubble up as he speaks. Bucky gently pats him on the back, soothing his blood-soaked curls out of his face with his other hand. Peter gulps down big mouthfuls of air as he tries to quell his sobs, until Bucky has to take the boy's face in his hands and say,
"Come on, baby, deep breaths. There you go. Slowly."
Peter says again, softer now. He sniffles and looks up at Bucky, finally, fat tears rolling down his cheeks as their eyes meet, and he whispers, terrified, "He was going to take you away!" He pulls Peter flush against his chest and holds him, knowing he's squeezing too tight and not caring. He doesn't want Peter to see the same terrified, heartbroken look on his own face. Wants his child to feel safe and protected in his arms when he really isn't safe with Bucky at all.
"We need to get you home,"
he says after a while when Peter's crying has stopped and he's gone limp in Bucky's lap.
"I need to take a look at you, and we gotta prepare in case this guy told anyone about us."
"What about him?" Peter asks, his voice sounding as hoarse and battered as his throat looks. Bucky turns and spares the man a spiteful glance, uncaring for the red accumulation of broken and bloodied skin that used to be his scarred face. He'll die of his injuries if they leave him like this. But Peter wouldn't want that.
"Can you walk? I'll drop him off outside the hospital and then take you home, but I can't carry both of you at the same time."
Peter nods, wiping his wet face off with his unbroken hand as he shakily gets to his feet. They end up leaving the man behind a parked ambulance in the ER parking lot of the nearest hospital, safe enough outside the range of the security cameras, but close enough that the paramedics will see him when they return to their truck. Peter insists that they wait on the neighboring rooftop until someone sees him and wheels him into the hospital, but thankfully it isn't long before Bucky can finally put his arm around his kid and take him home. Peter doesn't say anything as they make their way home, and Bucky assumes it's from the trauma to his throat and the pain no doubt throbbing in his wrist. It isn't until they're safely back home and the door is shut and locked that he finds out the real reason why Peter hasn't said anything the entire way here. "What?" he says, voice broken and cracking and filled with pain. "What happened to you back there? What did he do to you?" Bucky goes very still, gritting his teeth as he debates whether he should tell Peter the truth or not. He knows he has the right to know, but he also knows that if Hydra were to find out that Peter knew about the Winter Soldier, the next time they decided to kill him wouldn't be on a whim.
"Peter,"
he sighs, hating the unsureness of his own voice, hating the words even more.
"You know I can't tell you that. Please try to understand."
The boy is quiet for a long, tense moment that whispers, "I don't understand!" The tears evident in his voice. Bucky turns quickly and is struck by the frustrated, almost angry look on the kid's face, staring dejectedly down at the floor with heavy tears streaming down his cheeks. "I don't understand any of it! What did he want? What did he mean when he said you were going to kill me?" Bucky flinches, unable to stop himself from violently recoiling at the thought. The memory of what that guy said and did is hazy to him at best, right up until he broke Peter's wrist and pulled Bucky from his trance. But he doesn't doubt that guy would threaten Peter with making Bucky torture and kill him. He'd expect nothing less from an agent of Hydra. He swallows the guilt and despair that fills his chest and ushers Peter over to the love seat as he says,
"I need to look at your wrist before it heals too much for me to splint it, okay?"
The disappointment and frustration is clear as day on Peter's face, but he nods his head agreeably and lets Bucky examine and treat his wounds, though he stays silent and reserved for the rest of the night. He dreams of the farmhouse,
is a huge old house that he knows inside and out, though every room is entirely too big. No way they could all fit inside this one building. He moves from room to room, up and down staircases that always lead to the same hallway, searching, and he doesn't know why. The wooden floors creak and groan under his feet. At last he opens a door, an old dilapidated door that screeches from unoiled hinges as he pushes it open. There's a familiar room inside, but he knows it doesn't fit. It's not right. He walks through the doorway between the farmhouse to the apartment on the other side, and knows this isn't the way he meant to go. He looks across the room at the small familiar kitchen, the old appliances, the standalone counter and wobbly bar stool. He looks at the barren love seat and the even more barren mattress on the floor, kids, books, and movies and clothes piled all around them in every corner of the room. He knows this place, but he also knows it shouldn't be here. He tries to leave, but opening the front door only leads to the same apartment, like stepping into a mirror. He goes back and forth between the doorway, desperate, looking for a way out, a way back to the farmhouse, but it's hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. He opens the door over and over again, but the world doesn't exist, just this same apartment, the only thing on the other side. And then he steps inside, and there he is, finally. He feels relief overflow within him when he finally sees Peter lying there on the love seat, content and sound asleep. Bucky moves forward quietly, smiling down at the boy and crouching by the love seat so he can reach out and pull the sleeping bag over the boy's prone form, covering him. But suddenly a hand shoots out, and it grabs his metal wrist in an unbreakable grip. Bucky reels back, but the middle of his arm starts to bend, and he looks and is horrified to see that the hand holding his is broken grotesquely as well. The wrist, jagged and crooked like the bone, has snapped in half and never healed right. Bucky tries to tug himself free, but his hands end up wrapped around a small pale throat, and he pulls back, but they won't come off. No matter how desperately he yanks on them, powerless to do anything but watch as his fingers squeeze, as they tighten harder, harder, harder. He screams desperate and hysteric. No! He begs into the white world all around him, an endless void of it. Just him and this slender throat in his hands that he can't let go of. No, please don't make me do it! Don't make me do it! He feels arms circle around him, helping to try and pull him off the throat, but he can't see them, nothing in this white abyss except him. The arms tighten and squeeze, and then his screams slowly morph and turn into a name, repeated urgently and pleadingly all around him, filling his head until no other sound exists. Bucky! 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 He gasps and jerks awake, trying to sit up, but the arms around him pull him back down into someone's lap, and he thrashes, disoriented. Two slender hands pin his shoulders down as a familiar voice begs, "It's okay, Bucky! It's okay! It's me! Dad, it's me!" Bucky goes still, chest heaving and skin soaked in sweat. He looks up, sees Peter's worried upside-down face staring back at him, eyes wide and concerned as he hugs Bucky from behind with trembling hands. "Peter." Bucky pants, reality seeping back to him as he lifts Peter's hands off his shoulders. "What are you doing? You shouldn't be putting any pressure on your wrist." "You were thrashing," Peter says, voice still laden with fear. "I'm freaking out. I didn't know what else to do." Bucky sits up and looks at him, and his throat closes up at the sight. "His neck!" He chokes at the sight of Peter's neck, horribly discolored in the dark, like someone covered his skin in black handprints. "That wasn't me!" He screams desperately at himself, but it's too late. The image is stuck, burned into his mind, the image of himself strangling Peter on a rooftop, squeezing his neck until he breaks it. He rips himself away from Peter and drops his head in his hands as he gasps, desperate for air, fear and guilt and blind white-hot panic filling him. His neck! He can't unsee the bruises, the handprints, the realization of just how close this kid came to dying because of him. Hey, it's okay. Peter reaches out to him, but Bucky flinches at the touch, curling in on himself, tighter mouth open in a silent scream of anguish. His neck, his goddamn neck, fuck! The rush of blood in his ears drowns out Peter's voice until the boy wraps his arms around him and holds him tightly, crushing him against his small chest as Bucky shakes from the panic surging through him. He could feel the scratching material of Peter's splint against his face. It's okay. We're both okay, we're okay. Peter repeats, crying again because of him. Dad, we're okay. You're not okay, Bucky says through gritted teeth, his whole body pulled tight like a bowstring. You're hurt. Peter tightens his arms around him, and Bucky lets himself be held, though he knows he doesn't deserve it. Peter could have died, and it would have been all his fault, because he never told Peter just how dangerous he is. That man could have made Bucky kill Peter with his own hands, and Peter would have walked straight into it, not knowing any better. He can't ever let that happen. Peter, he says, not remembering the last time his voice sounded so quiet, so lifeless. I have to tell you the truth. Peter goes very still, but he sits there and listens, and holds Bucky the entire time, arms occasionally tightening around his neck when Bucky's voice breaks, accompanied by the sounds of Peter's sniffles and sob-filled breaths. He doesn't say anything as they sit together on that mattress, listening to Bucky explain everything about the Winter Soldier. All the horrible things he hadn't told him in the long months since they became family. And when it's over, Peter lowers his head until he's crying into Bucky's hair and says, I love you, and hugs Bucky as tightly as he can. Bucky brings his own hands up and squeezes Peter's arms around his neck reassuringly, then allows a small smile to spread across his face as he says, "Oh, kid, how come you don't hit nearly as hard as you hug, huh? Pretty sure my neck has dents in it." Peter laughs, a quiet, watery sound, and tightens his arms even more, trying to mask the way he's started to shake as he begins to cry again. Bucky lays there in his son's arms, Peter's arms in his hands, as he allows himself to be held and well. If he closes his eyes and finally lets his own scalding tears freely run down his face, it's not like Peter is able to see it.